So what I like to do is I like to record my sessions so that I can put them on my YouTube channel for public domain. So if anyone wants to comment or talk about things, just be aware that if it's that I am intending to publish this on my YouTube channel, if that's okay with everyone. If you want to have a talk with me about something a bit more private, a bit more personal, I'm quite happy to have a conversation with you afterwards. So to deal with something like that. So that is what I like to do on my YouTube channel. But firstly, welcome to session 13 of Talking Aspergers with Andrew. And today is one of my key strategies that I put to employers, and that's called the safe space. And it means what it says on the tin, you know, but it's people on the spectrum can get overwhelmed for a whole host of reasons. It can be noise, it can be the light, it can be other environmental factors, or it can just be they've had a lot going on and their boss has come and asked them about something, and then someone else has come and asked them about something else, and they get to the point where they have overwhelm, and they're in that nasty, tense situation where unless something happens, they're either going to have a meltdown or a blow up with someone at work, or this is where the safe space comes in. They can go and sit somewhere quietly on their own, get a cup of tea, and just sit down for 10 minutes and calm down, take the heat out of the situation, recompose themselves, and then be able to come back to work and be productive at work. And I think it's really important that businesses try and find somewhere that can be the safe space. Some businesses will be able to accommodate that quite easily. They'll have breakout rooms or breakout areas or other areas that are quiet. For some other companies, it might be a little difficult because their situation might not mean that they could provide something like that. But equally, there might be somewhere quiet. There'd be an unused meeting room or an unused office or an archive area or somewhere that's quiet. If they've got a canteen, that would be great. And just have somewhere where the people can go and just calm down and relax and be quiet. And that would take that's really important thing, because it takes the stress and the tension out of the person who has Asperger's. Hi, Damien, welcome. So it's a really important thing. And people say to me, oh, but I don't know if I can accommodate that. I said, well, you probably accommodate smokers who go outside the building and stand for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes and have a cigarette. What's wrong with, even if you don't have a room or somewhere that you could designate as a safe space, what's wrong with that, with someone who's on the spectrum who needs to get away, just to go stand outside the building for 5 or 10 minutes or go for a walk around the block if it's safe to do so. So there are ways to accommodate these kind of strategies, and I think it's important as we go forward. I mean, we are in the third decade of the 21st century, that employers are more aware of the things that they need to do to help their employees. And this is something that helps the employee, because the alternative is they're not able to cope, they have this blow up, or they think, I just can't cope, and they take time off work and they're off sick. That doesn't help the employee, it doesn't help their mental state, it doesn't help their ability to cope and feel as though they're valued at work, and it doesn't help the employer with someone being off on the sick. And that might be quite a lengthy period of absence, because they just can't cope with all of this things that are going on, the noise, or the people talking in the office and someone else talking in a different place, and 3 or 4 conversations going on. And all of these things just build up and build up and build up till you get to the point where I've got to get away. And this is something that I had in my previous career as a geologist, and way before I knew I had Asperger's syndrome, although I always knew and I was different for some reason. I would find somewhere quiet in the building to go, and it may just be that there was the stationery room where you go and get stationery. It was quiet. I would go and pretend to go and get some stationery and come back with a couple of pencils and a notepad, but I could be quiet, and it was quiet in that room where I could just calm down, take some deep breaths, compose myself, and go back to work. And people wouldn't notice that they've gone, oh, he's gone to the stationery room because he's come back with a couple of pencils and a couple of notepads. So there was ways that I found to cope with that in my work. And it worked, and it worked for me. And sometimes I would just go and stand outside the room, or outside the building, and just calm down, and it worked so well. And one of the things that is necessary as part of this is, okay, we put our health and safety hat on. Someone has left the office or left the building. What do we, if there's an emergency, there's a fire or an evacuation required, how do we know where that person is so that the emergency services know where to look for them, or things like that? This is where you have a signal, an agreed signal beforehand with your boss, with your line manager. And it might just be as simple as putting the stapler or your hole punch in the middle of your desk, so that when the boss comes out, sees, oh, Andrew's not there, but his stapler is, I know he's gone to his safe space, or he's gone outside the building. So that in the event of an evacuation or a fire or emergency, they know where to look for him, or they know how to account for him. The other really important thing about that is, having agreed the signal, the person doesn't have to go and ask for permission when they need to go away, because that moment, that potential conflict, that interaction with their boss, who might be a great boss, but they might be a boss who's having a tetchy day, which happens from time to time. And the last thing you want is, when you're in that emotional state of, I need to get away, have to go and say, excuse me, I need to go away. Can I? That doesn't work. You need to be able to trust the person to say, yep, I know he's gone. There's his stapler on the desk, or his hole punch. I know where to find him, and know everything's okay. And agree how you would deal with that in the office, in terms of making up the time. People who smoke and go outside to smoke, you would have agreed the ways to make up the time. So agree beforehand, have an understanding of how you would do that. And I think if we can put all these little things together, it gives the person who has Asperger's, or even some other form of I won't say mental illness, because I don't think Asperger's an illness, it's a condition. But some people who have anxiety or depression, they might feel the need to just get away from it all for 5 or 10 minutes, and that could be available to them as well. And I just think it's a great way of taking the tension out of a situation, so that the employee can feel better, can come back to work, can be productive, and hasn't had the stress and the angst built up to the point where they can have a meltdown or have an incident with someone at work, which is, you don't want to happen. I'm sure we've all been in situations where someone has asked us something, and then someone else has asked us something, and then the phone's gone, and then your boss wants a progress report, where you all will you all just calm down and form an orderly queue and let me deal with things one at a time, because however good I am at work, I can only ever do one thing at a time. So allow them to be able to do that and focus and come back to what they're doing at work. So that's my suggested strategy for employers. It's one of my 7 steps that I have on my online course, which I have, and it's things that I talk about when I talk to employers about ways to manage people with Asperger's syndrome at work. And I was just wondering whether anyone on the call today has had experience of that, or would have had experience of thinking that was a great idea, I could have done with it when I was working for such and such, or in certain situations, whether anyone's got any observations they want to make on that. John, is that something you might have come across?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. There's some very helpful practical ideas there. I think it's really important that people don't have to ask permission.
Yes.
Because I think that's quite an issue, to have to go. It's almost like being back in school and having to ask to go out. So I think there's a dignity element there. So that's really good. I think very important point. I suppose, question would be, what about when you haven't got the insight that your levels are rising and you need time out, you need a quiet time? I'm just thinking of a few situations where, somebody might just talk a lot because the anxiety levels are rising, and they might, talk very rapidly, and they may not be aware that, it is rising. Or a person might pace a lot and, not be aware of it, but it's just a de-escalation thing that they're doing and they're used to doing. And in the workplace, it might be appropriate to do it there. It might be better to do it elsewhere. So it's that, I suppose, phase when some people just need that little, they're job ready or job able, but they need a little bit of support with just getting to the stage of being self-aware and being able to say, now, it's going from amber into red, I need to go.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I completely agree with that. And I think this is where the employee and the employer need to have had their dialogue with your supervisor or your manager to say, in my case, I would have said, look, I have Asperger syndrome. There's going to come a time when things might get a bit too much for me and I need to just find a space to go away and be quiet. Can we agree on how we can do that? And so there's a self-responsibility of the employee, but there's also having the dialogue with your supervisor, with your manager to say, we're getting on really well and I think we're doing okay and we've got good lines of communication, because this all comes down to communication. And be able to say to them, there are times when I need to get away. Can we agree somewhere where I can go so that it doesn't escalate? And just as you said, it doesn't go from amber to red. And I think having that dialogue and that understanding is really important, because so many other things about how to manage people on the spectrum drop out of having that understanding and that responsible, mature discussion with your boss, with the supervisors. And there's a whole host of other techniques that you can employ, but it's having that trust moment with your colleagues to say, I've got Asperger's and there are times when I need to just calm down and refocus myself so that I can be productive when I get back to work. Can we agree how we can do that? And I think having that personal responsibility to have that conversation is important for the person, because as you say, John, that you might find them pacing up and down. You might find them talking and talking and talking really, 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 really fast, and their anxiety levels are building and building. And the last thing you want is for their office junior to come in to ask you something about something and you just escalate and boom. And I've been in places where that has happened. Not to me, but I know other colleagues that I've had who had their own issues that have just blown up at the office junior or at anyone, because they've got to the point where they couldn't cope. And I think we need to recognize that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have whenever they're at work. No one deliberately goes to work to set out to fail. Well, maybe one or two, but those people usually have other issues that may be long-standing with work, or there may be home situations. But most of the time, most people come in to work and want to do a good job and be valued at what they do. So find a way that works. Have that discussion. And this should be something that nowadays in the modern workplace should be cascaded down as well from the boardroom to the senior managers and the middle managers below that. So you're not surprising them with something. They should be aware that there are people who have a whole range of issues at work, people, different cultures, that the diversity range of people working in cultures and ethnicities, sexualities, and so on, so that having a broad ranging employee base, there are going to be people that have different needs, and it's understanding those different needs and accommodating those as best as you can so that the employee works well, does productive work, and you can manage how they do that at work. And I think the self-awareness of the employee is important, but the supervisor, the manager, needs to be aware of it as well. And the business as a whole needs to be more accommodating to all sorts of people who have all sorts of needs. Damien, is this something that you've encountered?
It's quite a wide area to sort of to consider. I suppose it starts off, a lot of it starts off with the company as a whole and the structure of the company. I find I work better when I have there's a clear structure and a clear procedures. At least when, for example, if there are multiple people asking me to do multiple jobs and the structure can sort of shift. I think some bosses it's almost like a mess of jobs going on, whereas I find that very difficult to concentrate. So I like to always quantify and turn something that might be messy into a clear plan as a general environment for working. So and then I suppose a lot of it is about managing yourself. Firstly, as was said before, self-awareness of your strengths, weaknesses, and what environment you need in order to function at the optimum, and then trying to manage your system. I think I'm quite lucky in the fact that a lot of my work is independent of other people. So I'm able to, for example, I work sometimes in the main office, but quite a lot of times I find that too distracting with the noises, the people whistling, the sort of clutter, people coming in and talking to you whenever they want. And I have another place I can go to work, a little office where I am now. But so in a way, I'm quite lucky to be able to create that environment in which sometimes I can have a space where I can really concentrate without people disturbing me. And then when people might send me messages, and that's fine, I sometimes find that easier because I can sort of put them into lists, of priority people's requests.
Yeah, I was always very much a list maker of things, whether that was a daily list or a weekly list or the job that I was doing that might be a 3-month task. So I would break it down into lists so that I could focus and concentrate on one or two individual things. And one of the other little techniques that I suggest to employers is be aware that some people can be sensitive to continual interruption and they need to be able to focus on what they're doing. So try and agree a strategy for when people can ask them questions. And they look and they think, well, how would you do that? Well, one of the ways to do that is at tea break time, because that serves two purposes. At tea break time, say that's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so that if people have a question they want to ask you, it might be that they've already previously answered their own question throughout the morning or the early part of the day, and they didn't actually need to ask you in the first place. And secondly, the person who has Asperger's or who has the condition is then mentally prepared that people can ask them questions, rather than someone continually interrupting them and making them lose their focus, so that they are then prepared to know that people might come to them at tea break time and have a question or two to ask them. They're prepared for it, so they're mentally aware that this might happen. So that planning and that preparation is in place. And the person who's asking the question, as I said earlier, they might have already answered their own question by going to look for something themselves, which I find is quite often the case. They might say, where's that so-and-so? Where's that report that we did last week? Well, the answer might be, if you look in the filing cabinet, it might be there. And rather than asking me or the person, where is that report, they should know that the report will be in that filing cabinet. So having systems in place of knowing where things are accountable. Is there a central filing system that details in filing cabinet 1, drawer number 1, drawer number 2, drawer number 3, and so on, with all the tabs behind it? That might seem very straightforward and very sensible thing to do, and it is, but I've found that there are places that I've worked in and that when I was a geologist, that they don't have a known filing system. There is one, but it's only 1 or 2 people who know how it works. And so asking for that report then becomes an issue because no one knows where to find it. So having systems in place, having a strategy, having a formula, and having lists that determine how all these things work is so important, because that puts structure, just as Damien said, it puts structure to the business, and it is then easier to follow the processes that govern that. And in consulting engineering, which was my background for quite a long time, we had quality plans that we had to follow. And I always made sure that when I was writing a quality plan, I would put in there what the filing system was, so that all the filing cabinets were labeled, all the bookshelves, all the shelves behind around the outside of the office were labeled, so that if anyone wanted to know where my stuff was, it was in filing cabinet 1, drawer 1, or if it was a big box full of information, it was on bookshelf 3, shelf 2. That might seem very logical to you, but that I've been in places where it's sort of piled around their desk, and they aren't able then to find what they need to find. And I was going to ask Claire whether she's had any experience of a safe space, or what her experience was in that area.
Do you know what? I haven't actually. I just know that, you know, in certain situations you do have to just create a bit of a physical space to get people away from sort of perhaps an overly stressful situation. But I don't know if anyone else has got perhaps a better example of that.
No, I used to create my own by, as I say, going to the stationery cupboard and things like that. But I think now some companies, the bigger companies certainly are looking at breakout areas which have soft furnishings, lower lighting, all these things that make a difference to someone on the spectrum or who are sensitive to certain things, and make it easier for them. I was going to ask you, Laura, have you had any experience of something like that in one of the safe spaces that might be quite relevant in a school is the library. Is if you've got the opportunity, if it looks like a student is struggling and they're getting rather tense, then is there the opportunity to allow them to go to the library to sit and calm down, because there's a librarian, there's someone who's looking after them, so they're not lost and unaccounted for.
While I was working in a school, now I'm not working in a school anymore. I'm working from home, so it's like my house is my safe place, of course. While I was working in school, I didn't have well, there were some empty rooms, I remember. So I had the keys for every room there. So I could just pick one room, open the door, and stay there for a while if I wished. So that was good enough.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
I had to recharge a lot because, you know, I was working with kids, teenagers mostly. So yeah, they're very noisy.
Yeah, but it's important that the two things there was, first, that you understood the need for your own mental well-being and health, that you needed to go somewhere, and secondly, you knew that there was somewhere that you could go because you had the keys to the rooms. And it's that reassurance that you know that you can do that is actually 90% of the situation with the person on the spectrum, and not having to ask for permission. That is so important, that when they feel the need to be able to want to get away, that they can just do so calmly, quietly, not creating a fuss around the office. And not everyone needs to know, but the people that need to know can find out by looking for the signal. And it really is important that understanding, that ability to be able to do that and get away. I think that actually takes away most of the problem. I think the fact that they can do that reassures them, in that they might not actually need it as often as they think they would need it, but it because they have that reassurance that it's been set up, it's in place, and they know that they can do that. John, did you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question. You were mentioning, Damien, there about the optimum system or optimum space, so you can work really well. So you've arranged it there in your place. And I'm just wondering, just a general question, do you find that it's easy or difficult for people to have courage to ask for those supports, is there a kind of a concern sometimes that you're putting yourself into a special place, and because I know of situations where people won't ask until it becomes a problem.
Yes, I wouldn't have asked, and I wouldn't want to ask for favors as well. Well, the only reason why I have a little separate office was because the manager here thought during the first period of the COVID that it was a good idea if people work separately. So it wasn't anything to do with autism, it was the COVID. So I sort of jumped at the opportunity to create a little space for myself to come. So in a way, it's luck, not nothing else. So yeah, I would find it difficult to try and ask for special treatment or to be considered, because I would quite think that people might consider you to be maybe outside the group, outside, and sort of dismiss you a little bit, and so it's a little bit maybe a bit of a game to try and create this environment, but still feel involved. And I will find certain times of the day when I'll go to the main office, specifically make myself a coffee and talk to people. So I'm almost attacking the situation of being present, being available, because some people will think that if you're working away from the main office, that you're not contactable, or you're not working, or you're not part of the team.
Yeah.
So I have to try and find those times to go and see people, chat to people, but still maintain my own productive working environment.
Yeah. I understand that. I think if we look at it, there's the Equality Act, which came in 2010, and that is something that has enabled people to feel a little safer in work, because you can't be discriminated against for a whole host of reasons, mental health and mental well-being being part of that. So hopefully employers are becoming more aware of their obligations and duties with regard to that act, and hopefully that cascades down through the business. But it does require the board to take on board what is happening, and to be aware of things, and to put things in place, and rather than just play lip service to it, there now is there is a law that requires them to attend to these matters, make reasonable adjustments is what it's called, for the workplace, so that people who are sensitive to light and noise, they can be found ways to minimize that for their sensitivities. And looking at that in the broader sense, it's how those management systems are put in place that can cascade down. So it shouldn't be a surprise to managers and supervisors that there will be individuals within their teams that have specific and certain needs. And you're right, Damien, there is the sort of the stigma, if you want to use that word, the potential stigma of having to ask for things. But equally, the alternative is you're either not there because you can't cope and you have to be off sick, or you have a blow up and you have a face-to-face row with someone, or you have a shouting match with someone, which clearly is not going to help the business. It doesn't help the individuals, and then there becomes a problem.
Yes.
So it is about balance, but I think it's about responsibility of that understanding of what the regulations are, and cascading that down through the business, and having someone accountable as well. Just as most companies will have someone accountable for health and safety, I think it's important that they have someone accountable for workplace well-being as well.
Yes, I suppose the human resources is very important to make you feel comfortable. And I've met human resource managers who are very, very good and very accommodating and helpful, helping you to be productive. And I think that's key.
Yes,
within a company.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes human resources get a bit of a bad rep, in that they can be very dictatorial and very, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. Whereas I see human resources as an aid to helping you work effectively and efficiently, which is a different way of looking at human resources from having someone who's, I want to say oppression, but that's not the right word at all. I can't think of the right word that I'm thinking of. But you want them to be sympathetic to the nature of the business and the employees, rather than to be there with the stick to beat people, metaphorically speaking, obviously. So human resources plays a huge role in how the business works with all the systems that they have in place. And it is really important that you have people working in human resources, and you're right, I mean, it's really important that the right people work in human resources, so that they can help the systems, they can manage the systems, and help the people work so that they can get the best out of themselves and the teams that they have around them. Yeah, because the alternative to having a more dictatorial approach is that people won't feel comfortable about speaking up about things. Then you then have time off, or you then have the blow-ups, which then becomes a human resources problem when the same person, or, oh, we've had an issue with Andrew again, that's 3 times this month. That will then eventually escalate into a human resources matter, because the managers or the manager above that suddenly realizes that this person's name is coming up time and time again, and it's always about the same sort of thing. So human resources then get involved, and you then have a situation where they have to make a decision. How do they help the person to be better at work, to alleviate the tensions that cause the potential blow-ups? Or do they think the other way? Do they think, how can we get rid of this person because they're being disruptive? Which is not what you want. You want everyone to work together, harmoniously. So when human resources find a name, and a name keeps coming to them for certain ways, then that's when you really need to have sympathetic, listening people who understand that there's someone here who has a specific need, and how can we address that? And most of the time, it's my experience that will be a communication issue between that person and their manager. Claire, you're throwing your hands up.
Oh no, it's all right. I was just thinking about something. Sorry, I was just like, oh, then it's just gone. Sorry, I did have a couple of things to ask you in relation to what you just said. So, do you find that people are honest about how often, if they're suffering from autism or not, and if they're not, how do you sort of deal with some of the reactions?
I think there are people who tend to hide it and don't reveal it, because they think if I tell them, they're going to use that as an excuse to fire me. And I think we need to have that discussion, that honest discussion that says, look, I have autism, I have Asperger's. There are ways that we can help each other communicate with me, and me communicate with you. And I think one of the ways is to have that discussion with your supervisors, with your managers, because in telling them how what your traits are and what your characteristics are, you're actually, in a way, you're training them to communicate with you better. And I think that's really important, that it comes down to communication. All of this comes down to communication. And I personally would tell people that I had Asperger's syndrome, and I would say, I have some strengths, I have some weaknesses, but these are the things that we can do together that will make it easier and better for me to work in the team and work with you. So that's how I would do it. But I think it is important to speak up and say yes, and have that conversation.
That's a good question. I wonder, yes, just from your question there, Claire, I wonder, has anybody developed a toolkit or something like that can go into companies and can be there to support a company to upscale itself and be aware of the different needs that are within its workforce? I'm just thinking, like, if you have a company canteen, you're going to cater for different diets. Yes. So if somebody has an allergy, they're going to go in and they're going to be able to get the, you know, the gluten-free option. And, you know, if you have other needs in other areas of the workplace, you know, we've done so much education around food allergies and that in the last 10 years. Is there a need for a similar process of education in the workplace around other needs that people have in their workspace? And who's going to do that?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
Is there a way to join and lobby for that?
Yes, there is. There's the workplace environment assessment, which is what employers should be doing to evaluate all the sorts of things around work, such as the lighting, the sound and noise, the environmental factors such as smells and textures of surfaces. All of these things should be done. The environmental assessment should be done in the workplace, so that someone with Asperger's or has a particular sensitivity to light, you don't sit them right next to the window, or if you do, make sure they have a blind that they can pull down. And all of these things come as part of that environmental assessment, so that the employers are doing as much as they can that is reasonable and fair to accommodate everyone's needs in the workplace. And that's part of their obligations to do that. Yes. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to say I've got about a minute left on my time, and I can't believe we've covered so much so quickly. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming on. If you wanted to carry on the conversation, I'm quite happy to talk to you afterwards on a separate call, or we can communicate via email or on LinkedIn. But yeah, the safe space is a key component to the strategies that I put together for managing people with Asperger's in the workplace. So thank you all very much for coming along. I'm going to turn off the record.